Welcome to this episode of Talk is Biotech. My name is Guru Singh. I'm the CEO of SciSpot.io and the host of this show. Today we have one inspiring bio entrepreneur with us, John Butler. He's the CEO of QuantumCyte. We will learn about his journey, his company, his mission, vision, and much more. Welcome to the show, John. Great to have you.
Thanks, Guru. Thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
John, let's start with a quick introduction. Who are you?
So, as you said, I'm John Butler. I'm the CEO and founder of a health tech company called QuantumCyte. We're located in Sunnyvale, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley, if you will. We're actually a couple blocks away from Intel. So I'm a science geek by nature. I've spent my entire career developing technologies for the biological industry. Spent a lot of time developing technologies for the human genome sequencing project and then various startups and various large companies, and spent a lot of my time developing the chemistries that are used to interrogate the human genome, sequencing DNA, and looking at the different types of molecules. Spent, again, a fair bit of my career in development and research and development, and then spent about 9 years of my career in hardcore manufacturing the products that I had developed throughout my most recently at QuantumCyte. Myself and my co-founder, about 9 years ago, identified an unmet need in the field of cancer specifically. And we wanted to pursue the development of a technology to try to find drug therapies for every cancer patient on the planet, if you will. It's a little known fact, I think, that for the most well-studied cancers such as breast, colon, and prostate cancer, only about 25% of those patients actually have drug therapy options available, FDA-approved therapy options. And if you start to look at some of the more rare cancers, it's even less. Matter of fact, rare cancers typically don't have drug therapy options. So we wanted to attack the problems from a genetic perspective and develop a technology that would allow you to, look at each individual patient's biology, cancer biology, and try to find drug therapies that would cure their cancer, again, for virtually every cancer. And we're taking a technical approach to that because we're technology developers. We're not oncologists. We're working with oncologists to create this approach to doing what's called personalized medicine.
So do you want to elaborate that? What do you mean by, I'm paraphrasing obviously, to bringing cures for all the cancer patients? So how are you supporting that? Like, how is your technology helping with that? So It is almost a personalized medicine, patient-specific solutions. Do you want to explain how exactly?
Absolutely. So when you look at cancer, and if you look at the way drugs have been developed in the past for cancer, they use the main metric that they use to identify a drug that's a good drug for cancer therapy is tumor shrinkage.
Right.
They literally measure the mass of the tumor, and then they give a large population of people with, say, breast cancer the drug, and if 20 to 25% of the patients' tumors shrink to, say, down to 10% or 5% the total mass, they say this is a success, right? The issue is that the remaining 5% of those cells, which are drug resistant, now can come back and grow, and now you have drug resistance, so that drug fails to work for those patients.
Right.
When you look at these clinical trials, what you recognize immediately is that no two patients respond the same to the drug. And when you dive in deeper, say, to the individual patient, and you look at different tumors and how they respond to the drug, no two tumors essentially respond the same to that drug. And then when you get down to the cell level, down to the individual cancer cell level, what you find is that there's an extreme amount of what's called heterogeneity. The genetics of the individual cells are very different, and those individual cells respond differently to the drug therapy. And so what we do is we look at a patient's tumor and we can segregate out the drug resistant cells from the drug responsive cells. We can go in and we extract the DNA from those cells and we study them in a way that we can look for changes in the DNA. They're called biomarkers or markers, and those markers have been characterized, or if you have this specific marker, those cells will respond to this drug. And that drug doesn't have to be a cancer therapy. It can be a drug for diabetes, Alzheimer's, what have you. So now you're in a situation where you're not only treating the cells that respond to the current drug therapy, the breast cancer therapy that's FDA approved. Now you can recommend this breast cancer therapy along with this other drug for that patient to essentially you really want to get to those drug resistant cells and kill those. So we've developed a very unique way of identifying the drug resistant cells, extracting the nucleic acid, and studying it in a way to give these patients multiple drug therapy options.
That's very interesting. So you're saying currently we treat or we bring new treatments based on like a big population, right? It's more like a mass treatment approach. But you are saying every patient has different cancer, and even at the cellular level, cells behave differently. So what you are saying is you help them identify those unique signatures or biomarkers and help the companies. Now, this is the part which is not clear to me. Help the companies create new cocktails of
No,
treatment to treat.
no,
No?
no. We
Okay.
actually work with clinical labs, hospitals, and hospitals and core facilities at hospitals and universities. So these are clinical labs that already have tests
Okay.
that they are using on patients, right? And in those tests, they can detect at a certain level how a patient will respond to current drug therapies.
Right.
Within those tests, if you can segregate out, so what they study is they study all the cells at one time.
Right.
So the drug resistant and the drug responsive cells. Well, those drug resistant cells are a very small population of the total cancer population.
Yeah.
So when they extract the tumor, they have 95% of the cells are the drug responsive cells, 5% are non-responsive. When they analyze the DNA, they analyze the bulk DNA, all of the DNA from those cancer cells, and so the signal is primarily from the drug responsive cells.
Got it.
Because you get the signal to noise issue. What we do is we say we're going to segregate out the two cell populations, right? And now you're going to study the drug responsive cells in your test. That's great. You're also going to study the drug resistant cells. So now you effectively increase that signal to noise. Because when you study DNA, when you do sequencing, it's just data.
Right.
And if 95% of the data, if you have 95% noise, it's really hard to really come up with a high level of confidence in your test. So effectively purify, if you will, those drug resistant cells and allow you to study them in a level of detail.
Would you say the desired outcome here is help doctors, physician to better plan the treatment? What is the desired outcome here?
The desired outcome is for patients and doctors to have more options for drug therapy.
Got it.
Right. So patients are as much part of their medical team as the doctors. As a matter of fact, I would argue that the patients are leading the medical team. This is from personal experience. But patients want that information, and especially as their cancer evolves and they become more and more resistant, they want more options. And so as the drug resistant population grows, with our technology, we can go and dive deeper into the genomics, dive deeper into the genetics, and find other drug therapy options for them. Right. So it's not just a single test. As the cancer progresses, you continue to test it and try to identify those drug therapies.
Very cool. So it's more patient-centric approach, and you're empowering basically doctors making smarter decisions.
Exactly.
Love it. And what's the traditional way? So if you have to, so it is innovative. I can totally see that. I want to understand more how it is innovative, like in terms of like how quickly you can deliver results and how these results are superior than the traditional technologies. I would love to know more about that.
Right. So the current traditional method for studying a biopsy is you take the tumor out of the body and you fix it with formalin, so that you essentially lock the cells in time, right? And then you actually take a thin section of the tumor, biopsy, and you mount it to a slide, and then a pathologist will look at it and they'll identify where the cancer cells are. Right. And if they identify the cancer cells, then they say, I would like to look at the genetics of this population of cancer cells. They then turn that tissue section over to a technician who takes a razor blade and goes in and scrapes literally scrapes the cells off of the slides and puts that into a tube. So you have limited resolution there, right? It's called manual macro dissection, right? And that's the standard process,
Right.
And for that, and technicians are going to struggle to isolate the drug-resistant cells from the drug responsive cells.
Right.
So what our technology does is we take the same pathology information, the same tissue, and we can go in and extract just from these small number of cancer resistant cells in an automated way, right? So currently it's manual. You have to have very skilled technicians to do this manual macro dissection. We actually automate that process, right? And we can get tremendous throughput, and we can run hundreds of biopsies in a given shift, if you will, as opposed to what currently they can still do, hundreds in the same period of time, but they can't get the level of resolution that we can. And it's not scalable because, again, it's really dependent on people doing this process, which is labor intensive. They're dealing with a lot of repetitive stress injuries. So there's a desire to automate that. If you look out, and that's in the US, if you look outside the US, in Asia, where we have a presence, they have very few technicians to do this, and they really want to automate it so they can get the patients and doctors the information that they need. There's another component to the workflow, which is an upfront AI machine learning algorithm that we're working on to automate the pathology, right? So currently, a person looks at the slide, looks at the biopsy, and they take a touch screen, they circle these sort of areas. Here's the cancer cell, here's the cancer cell, right? We can take that digital output and we can go and extract the material from that manual annotation. More importantly, we take the pathologist annotations, and with our AI, we teach the system, the algorithm, to identify these cancer cells. And so now you can automate it, and now you get tremendous throughput. Instead of having a person do it and taking 15 minutes a slide, we can actually do hundreds of them seconds.
Wow.
So now this upfront pathology is automated. Now that's especially attractive in Asia, Singapore, Hong Kong, China, essentially Southeast Asia, because they have a very few pathologists available in a given country, right? So they're very attracted to this upfront AI pathology. And when we link the AI with our ability to identify the cells and extract a nucleic acid, now you can start to really run hundreds of patients of samples per day, if not more.
Very cool. How did you train these models? Using the primary data or also leveraging secondary data, pictures from scientific journals?
Right now we're using primary data. The AI depends on a specific scanner, so you have to control the way that you treat the biopsy, right? So you stain it in a specific way, and then you also scan it on a specific type of scanner. So the imaging has to be fairly well controlled.
Right.
So we've got collaborations with major hospitals in the US as well as in Europe and as well as in Asia. We're not changing the way the pathologists do their work. They're still staining this way. They're still using this scanner, and they're still annotating. We're just learning from that. So in a given lab, we won't change their current workflow. We'll just automate the pathology.
Love it. And we talked about the technology, a little bit about the impact. So what is your why? Like entrepreneurship, the whole entrepreneurial journey is not easy, right? It's not straightforward. It's you're experimenting. You learn how to be uncomfortable, how to be comfortable in uncomfortable situation all the time, because you're always uncomfortable. Why did you choose this journey? Because you had a pretty successful career even before starting QuantumCyte. So what is your why? Because most mission-driven founders always they have some why behind it.
Yeah, December 27th of 2007, my wife was diagnosed with late-stage metastatic carcinoid cancer. It's a rare, incurable cancer, and she had a primary in her small intestine and had metastasized to her liver. So what metastasis is, that the cancer will as it matures, if you will, in the body, cells will slough off of that primary tumor. They're called circulating tumor cells. They go through the lymph nodes into the blood, and then they can attach to a distant organ. In this case, the metastasis was to her liver, and she had 50 to 60 tumors in her liver. So a high tumor burden. And when she was diagnosed, I was on my way to being a very successful COO, very lucrative job, and learning more about her cancer and really understanding more about cancer in general and how little we actually know about the disease. I turned my attention to trying to help patients like my wife find drug therapies. Again, my background in genetics and genomics prior to my wife getting diagnosed, the field was moving in the direction where the DNA sequence was allowing you to identify these markers for drug therapy. And so I simply asked the question, why aren't we using these biomarkers or these markers to find a drug therapy for my wife? Right. So fortunately, I live right down the street from Stanford. I went down, I thought, okay, there's some pretty smart people over there. I went over to the lab of, his name is Ron Davis. He's one of the fathers of genetics. And I said, look, I need to incubate. I need to figure out how to find a drug therapy for my wife and these people that have these incurable cancers. So I joined his lab for a couple of years, essentially incubated, and really looking at how can I solve this problem? How can I find drug therapies for these patients? And so we decided to solve it with technology. Spent 2 years at Ron's lab, another 2 years in the med school, working under one of the world's leading surgical oncologists. Her name is Stephanie Jeffrey. She's very well known in the field of metastatic cancer. Her and I had very similar research objectives, which were finding these patients with rare, incurable, untreatable cancers, drugs. So over a course of 4 years, simply incubating and trying to figure out how can I solve this problem. About 2016, came up with a concept. Again, I'm a technical guy. I build technologies. My co-founder does the same thing. We said, we're not going to become oncologists. We're going to solve this problem with technology. We're going to get in bed with the best oncologists in the world, and we're going to talk to them about how we can solve this problem. And essentially, they gave us the requirements. Right. So 2016 came up with a concept, got a little bit of data, and then went out to the investment world, raised about $575,000, something like that, early May 2017. We entered into IndieBio's accelerator program with Arvind Gupta and his crew. 4.5 months later, we did a demo of our technology. And then again, this is kind of where the entrepreneur part comes in, where you're constantly unsure of what you're doing. We went with the original concept. We went out to the investment community and pitched it and tried to raise some money. Well, that original concept was in a field called single cell analysis, essentially. And that ship had sailed. The investment ship had sailed that in 2017. So we couldn't raise money. So we turned our attention to another approach. We did a pivot, a technical pivot. We adopt our platform to this other field. It's called spatial molecular profiling. It's an R&D biomarker discovery market, very hot market. And so my co-founder and I are very creative guys. He's on the engineering side, I'm on the science side. We said, let's see if we can adopt our platform for this. So we had about $250,000 in the bank. And we said, well, should we just pay our bills and go get paying jobs, or should we just do something stupid like take this 250 and see if we can get the technology and do a demonstration to get into this very, very large market, right, to raise money. So 2018 was spent head down lab innovating, not getting paid. And 2019 we got a proof of concept study finished, went up to JP Morgan in San Francisco to pitch the idea to try to raise money. I was on a couple of panels, presented a couple of conferences, and we were getting zero interest in the market that we thought we were going into, which is called spatial molecular profiling, called an R&D market. Yeah. We're getting tremendous pull from clinical markets, pharma and hospitals and pathology labs, and we did not know why with our technology. So we spent the next 6 months in customer discovery. I'm a big fan of Lean Launchpad and the iCore program through NSF. So we went to customer discovery. Why do these big markets want our technology? And we figured out it's the automation piece, and it's the ability to zero in on these regions using current clinical tests, right? So the clinical markets are different than R&D. R&D is very kind of sporadic, right? They do a couple of tests and they may or may not buy your product. Clinical markets, they have a clinical test, they have a demand, they have a price. And as long as you can either meet that price and and show some benefit, it's a pretty simple market to get into. It's very straightforward from a business perspective. Right. So we spent a year, 2019, trying to figure out why these markets wanted us. Fast forward to mid 2020, we finished a phase 1 trial with Singapore General Hospital, demonstrating the utility of the platform. And now I was just told July 5th, we can travel to Singapore, and we're going to be doing a phase 2 clinical trial, 2 phase 2 clinical trials of Singapore using our technology and 2 clinically validated tests. We have tremendous traction in Europe as well, and US is coming along. But during that time, I probably didn't get paid for 2 years in a row, right? Neither did my founder. Basically, we had one scientist, and I said, as long as she gets paid, nobody else gets paid, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a journey, very stressful, but rewarding, because now we're starting to come out of it with traction, revenue, and really seeing the benefit and the utility of the technology. And it's really starting to benefit patients' lives.
Yeah, that's why I asked your why, because when you start a business, it's very easy to give up because there's so many hurdles. But if you have your strong why behind it, it's easier to stick around and keep
Yeah.
trying.
Yeah. The key is having a network that's deep and wide,
Right.
a network of people that are professional and are willing to help without getting paid. So we offered equity to people.
Right.
My cap table's pretty long,
Yeah.
but these are professionals. These are MD PhDs from Stanford, Harvard, Dana-Farber, some of the best people, chemists in the field of nucleic acid chemistry. And then on the engineering side, my co-founder Badan, he's from Intel, and we're actually a preferred customer of Intel. And what that means is we have access to Intel resources, engineers, right? And we have Intel engineers come over and design stuff for us in our box for us. And it's an incredible network. And so the key is the network, as well as having investors that you take care of. So we have investors that I'm very close to. We've made it very personal when people have invested, and they've come through and continue to sort of fund us, because we're going on 5 years now, and we're starting to sort of take off. And so we're fortunate enough to have the investors, but the network is just absolutely key. And we're constantly expanding our network through, the IndieBio Accelerator expanded our network. We went through Endless Frontier Labs, which is out of NYU, expanded the network again. And then we're also a StartX company, which is a pretty incredible entrepreneur community. So we just go to our network when we have questions. And the entrepreneur community, as you know, is very tight, and entrepreneurs will help entrepreneurs
100%.
through their problems, simply because we're all going through the same thing, but we all have the same desire to help. And there's a mission, there's a personal mission there. Again, there's the money making part, but there's also, like with your company, you're helping companies like mine actually access their data in a much more straightforward way, which is super, super important. Right. So.
No, I couldn't agree more. So because we are already talking about it, like how important is it to expand your network? How important is it to leverage existing credible network, like you mentioned, IndieBio? Because when you start a company, everyone doubt you, right? So because you are new, they don't know, because entrepreneurs, to be fair, they are always overexcited about things, right? That's why they're entrepreneurs. So sometimes all they need is credibility, because if there's nobody willing to invest money because they think it's too early, or nobody willing to buy the technology because they don't have enough social proof, so they have to be a risk taker too. So what advice would you give to entrepreneur to really build more credibility early on and win the trust of investors in early stages? Because when you don't need money from investors, they follow you, right? Because you already have other investors. So everyone is looking for social proof. So what did you learn that you would like to share with aspiring bio entrepreneurs or current entrepreneurs?
The most important thing about this game and start becoming an entrepreneur is you have to have a very supportive family structure.
Right.
If your significant other doesn't support you and really understand that it's going to be really, really hard, you're going to go from being a calm person to having panic attacks and anxiety and up at 2:00 in the morning pacing the hallways, and the sky is falling. You need that family structure to talk you off the cliff, because you're on the cliff a lot. So that's the main thing I have. I'm lucky to have a wife that's super, super supportive. She's very successful. And if I didn't have her, I wouldn't be going down this. I don't think I would survive. But in terms of, again, the question around networks and getting investors, you just have to have grit and you have to be persistent, right? And you have to figure out what your message is. It took us a couple of years to figure out what our value proposition was, right? You have to figure out what that value proposition is. But for the early investors, you've got to go out and you got to essentially beat the street. We had a dream and we were looking for some angels to help us out. In my network, I have people that I work with, large companies that became angels.
Right.
So I tapped them and I didn't go to them saying, hey, I need money. I went to them saying, I need advice. And should I pursue this? Tell me if I should pursue this. And is this a good idea? And it just slowly happened. So the first 3 years of the company, we probably raised $100,000. Right. I was doing some consulting and so forth, but about $100,000. And once we started to get a little bit of data, and again, establishing those relationships in the investment community, getting intros from, again, credibility. My good friend, his name is Brock Siegel. I worked with him at Applied Biosystems. He went off to a company called Solexa. Solexa built the sequencer that Illumina bought Solexa, and that sequencer built Illumina. So Brock went from COO to angel investor. Right. So I tapped Brock and said, I've got this idea. What do you think? He said, you should go talk to this person or this person. Right. So you got to foster those relationships. And again, you're never raising money. You're always asking for advice. Right. I know that people hear that a lot, but you really have to sort of pursue that or keep that in mind. The other thing around investment is you have to be super careful about who you talk to. And the first question you need to ask a quote unquote investors, how much money do you have in your checking account? And are you a real investor? Because you're going to get a lot of people that are out there getting information. So I'd have to say 95% of the people that thought were investors early on were people just trying to gather information. Will waste a ton of your time. So you have to be very careful and do some background checks on people who claim they're investors. And you've been through this, I'm sure, right? And so again, for us, it was just grit, and we just had the desire to get this done. We weren't going to stop. We knew we had a good idea, and the foundation of the whole technology was built on working with, again, not just people like Ron Davis and Stephanie Jeffries at Stanford. It's people like Dana Farber and other people in the field looking at this saying, you need to pursue that, continue to pursue that, and then bringing them into your network. So a lot of that, but really, really hard. I went from, again, being sort of calm to, I had anxiety, I had panic attacks, and then one day I said, I can't do this anymore. So I sort of discovered what's called mindfulness. And I've changed the way I am, and even the people I work with that work for me said, you've changed a lot, but you have to pay attention to your health. About talking to people, going to conferences. If you go to these investor conferences, just be careful who you talk to. There are some sharks out there. But my biggest recommendation is look at the accelerator programs like the IndieBios, the StartX's, the Y Combinator, Endless Frontier Labs. Look at these organizations because it does expand your network, and you're with people that are going through the same thing. It's kind of how we approach it. I think I answered the question.
100%, 100%. And that's what I learned. Like first few months was really hard for us because even when we didn't have product, so it's really hard to show something tangible. You are just talking based on mock-ups and everything. But as soon as we started establishing more partnerships, started selling more licenses, joining one of the accelerators in the Bay Area, Y Combinator. So it just changes the whole game overnight.
The thing I like about the accelerators, the thing I like about IndieBio as well as StartX is you go there, right? Same with YCOM. You get through it.
Yeah.
It's not the end. It's actually the beginning.
100%.
Yeah. And they're always pushing you. Always checking in. How are things going? The IndieBio guys continue to follow, and their fund has gotten larger, and so they're bringing in a lot of advice. And again, being a first-time entrepreneur, first-time CEO, everything is new every single day, right? Like I have to make this business decision, right? So who do I call? I call Arvind Gupta, or like tap the StartX community or whatever and say, I need to make the right decision. So that is vital, and it's actually kind of fun. I mean, Y Combinator, we haven't gone through Y Combinator, but it's much like IndieBio. It's tough.
Yeah.
I think you expand those networks. The other thing that we're finding, especially now that we're starting to enter our Series A, is 3 years ago, I identified 5 VCs that I thought I potentially would want to do a Series A with these people, and they become friends, right? And so keep them up to date, and they become a tremendous resource as we move through the process. So a couple of them that I just keep them updated, and they say you should talk to this person or whatever, but you're always asking for advice. But really just establishing those relationships, because whether or not you do a deal with these people, they're really good people, and
Right.
you always get coffee. That's what I've learned during COVID. So I used to sort of put business ahead of, I can't have coffee with you, I don't have time now. Guru, you come down to the Bay Area, we will have coffee. So it's just that relationship building, right? So
Yeah, no, you cannot do it everything yourself, right? You need to work in networks, especially like now we are seeing this not just when you start a business, but also how businesses are operating these days. They are working in network because it just de-risks the whole game, right? So you focus on your strengths and then you rely on other people's strength, work in network, form win-win partnerships, relationships in the long run. So I think it gives you superior results.
yeah. And like I said, it's about establishing relationships. So now that we're working on our Series A, we've got our finance team, we've got our legal team, biz dev. We're sort of humming along. We have the actual right team. It took us a lot of time to get that team together, to start to see the light. And then also, again, do we need a Series A? Is it going to be revenue driven? We're able to make those decisions now. If we were a year ago, I couldn't make those decisions because I was still trying to just pay everybody.
Right.
Get traction. What we do is hard. I mean, even me and you, what we do is really hard. Like life sciences stuff, it isn't easy. It's not it's a multi-year start, if you will.
Right. I mean, whatever you create, there is like you are not just solving the problem, you're also fighting the status quo because people are so comfortable with the current ways of doing things. They don't care about, in many cases, I mean, I'm sure there are people more entrepreneurial risk takers, but in many cases, people don't care about efficiency gains. All they care about is they have a system. They rather follow the broken system than trying new ways, new innovative ways to solve problems. So,
Yeah, and that's exactly what, again, when we came out with this concept and we started discussing it, there were the majority of people were doubters, mainly because they were stuck in, I shouldn't say stuck, they had their way of thinking.
right.
And we said, that's fine, continue down that path, and we continue to pursue. And you have to find those early adopters.
Right.
As in our case, it's an anatomical pathologist in Singapore named Tony Lim. He's an early adopter, hungry.
Right.
And said, bring the system over, let's generate some data, and let's go. Finding the customers that are like that, the early adopters, especially ones that are key opinion leaders, definitely allows you to have more confidence.
Yeah. So what's your experience with Singapore market and people there? We all know about Bay Area. People are very entrepreneur.
Yeah.
We see all these success stories, unicorns coming out of the area. But from your experience in Asian market and especially Singapore.
So Singapore is a very unique place to work. It's actually a lot of fun. People in Singapore are very honest, straightforward, and hungry, right? They like new technologies, and they're very easy to work with.
Right.
The culture there is, in my opinion, similar to the Bay Area, except I think in the Bay Area you get the crazy entrepreneurs, right? That are, I'm just going to do it, get out of my way. Singapore, they're a little bit, I don't know, more professional, but they're very hungry and they're very methodical about what they do, and they're willing to take chances. So we went on a trip to Singapore. We met this individual who ran all the clinical tests for Sing Health, which is, I think, a 12 hospital system. And I showed him the technology, and he actually told us what our value proposition was. So our value proposition is 25% of the patients that submit their biopsy for a given clinical test don't get the information they need to find treatment options. Right. So with our technology, we can actually service the 25% of those patients. That's our value prop. Right. And it's actually, what that means is that 25% of the market is not being served. It's a large market. We actually can serve that market. Yeah. Okay. He explained that to us. And we talked about the personalized medicine stuff, but from a value prop and something that makes sense financially, that's our value proposition.
Right.
So we did that. We learned that from this individual, and then he said, I want to do some testing. I said, okay, well, do you have some tissue you can send me? And he may or may not have gotten on a flight the following week and may or may not had something in his pocket and handed it to us in our lab. We may or may not have analyzed it for him and actually may or may not have got some promising data. But it's that kind of like spirit, like what is it? Break all the rules. And so really enjoy working with people in Singapore because they get it and they just move. Let's do this
Right.
and let's get it done. Let's get the data because Singapore serves a lot of Southeast Asia patients,
Mm-hmm.
and they see these, the inability to get the data, the information to them quickly, and they're looking for solutions for that. And so we
Right.
provide those solutions, but really just very easy to work with, very straightforward. We enjoy it, and we're looking forward to going back. We haven't been there since before COVID. And
Mm-hmm.
now we're finding that they're opening it up, and that, again, I just heard that after July 5th, we can go to Singapore. So we're going to hop on flights and go over there. And the food's it's great. So that's the other thing we like about Singapore.
Yeah. No, Singapore is totally a special place because what I realized is startups from day one think about expanding to other markets, right? Because they cannot rely on the local market. From day one, they are completely open to options, right? But if compared to if you start a business in a US, right, you already have so big market locally to work with. You generally don't think about expansion on day one, like Uber focused on San Francisco area in the beginning, right? Because they already have lucrative market access to that. But Singapore, what makes them special is day one, they think about expanding to North America, Europe, other Asian regions.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that makes them entrepreneurial by default because they're open to different uh,
right.
uh, cultures, expanding into the markets.
And they move at a different pace. So again, for our field, for what we do in the clinical markets, US is different than Europe is different than Singapore, right? And the implementation model in the US is more fragmented
Right.
because hospital systems do business differently. In
Right.
Singapore, they're actually very similar, and it's the same in Europe. If you get the attention of the key opinion leader and they bless the technology, then you can expand
Right.
much easier. And in the US, you have to be a little bit more surgical, if you will. But in the US, once you get that foothold in and get the data, things can expand tremendously. But it's just a little bit slower in the US. So our traction is in Singapore. I mentioned that the phase 2 clinical trials we're starting in probably in August.
Mhm.
And then in Europe, we're getting tremendous traction as well, simply because of the model, right? So we're going to Denmark and we're talking to the main key opinion leader in the main hospital there. We have their attention, and we need to make sure that they like the technology, and they will then expand that to the greater hospital system in Denmark. Now, it can go the other way. If they don't like the technology, then you can kiss Denmark goodbye, but or other countries. But it's a little bit, for me, understanding those markets and how to penetrate those markets is much more straightforward than in the US. Now, not to say we're not working in the US, it's just a little bit more, it's a little bit, quite frankly, I don't know, slower, methodical. But yeah, you got to think about expanding outside the US. It
Right.
depends on the product. But for us, Singapore was natural, and Europe is natural now because we have a salesperson that actually is in Europe
Yeah.
saying, I want to go sell this thing. And they are.
Very cool. So so I would love to understand what is your business model? How
Yeah.
do you make money currently, and what type of traction you have?
Right. So right now we offer a service, and that's because we have one lab in Sunnyvale. And so what we do is we run samples for people. So we do large contracts for groups that wanna study 1,000 biopsies, and they want the data in 4 or 5 months.
Mhm.
So if you look at the current workflows for doing these types of studies versus ours, these large studies that I mentioned, using the current technologies available to do these types of studies will take you 3 years to get
Wow.
the data. We can get that data in 4 to 5 months, right? So that's one of our value propositions. And that's a business that we're running right now, and we're generating revenue from that service. Our ultimate goal is to build a tool, which we're currently building as the system, and integrate that system into every hospital system, in the world, right?
Mhm.
And that business model is to sell the workflow, which is essentially it's a box, right, that you run the samples through. and a consumable, right?
Yeah.
So we sell the box, or right now we actually give the box away, and then we generate revenue from the consumables on a recurring revenue model, much like a SaaS model.
Right. Right.
And we integrate into the clinical labs at the various hospitals. And once we get integrated into clinical workflow, they'll keep our technology for 10 years. And again, the revenue model is very straightforward. They're doing colorectal cancer and at Singapore General Hospital. It's 2,000 patient samples, 4,000 patient samples per year. We know what that model is. We know what our pricing point needs to be. The way this thing expands is very interesting. So I'll use Singapore as an example. Singapore General Hospital, Tony Lim, we're working with them. We're going to validate our test for 2 tests, one for lung and one for colorectal cancer. Once that gets validated and integrate into his clinical workflow, then they will install that workflow in the other 9 hospitals in Singapore, right, to run it. So he validates, and then they install in the other 10 hospitals. So now you go from 2,000 samples at Singapore General Hospital to 20,000 samples throughout the greater Sing Health system. And so we continue to validate tests within this one hospital system, and then they expand to the greater system. That's just one hospital system.
Right.
That same model works in Europe. It's the exact same type of model. If you're in Germany working with University of Heidelberg and they develop a test at Heidelberg, that's sort of the key hospital, then that gets expanded to the greater hospital system. So the business model is to sell instruments and consumables, right? And that's with existing workflows. We also want to start to integrate the upfront AI digital pathology, and that's a longer term kind of goal. We're using that with some of our key customers that want to do automated pathology. It's kind of an exploratory thing. We're seeing traction. Actually, it's beyond exploratory. We start to explore the opportunity now. It's starting to sort of expand. And so we would offer the front end, we'll automate your pathology, and then the instrument consumables. So there's a software benefit. That's really the business model.
Right. Do you see your AI working with other competing systems as well? Do you want it to be more agnostic, or it will only work with QuantumCyte boxes?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, look, if there's money to be made and it makes sense, sure.
Right.
Yeah, but haven't thought too much beyond that. But I would imagine that's something that we could explore.
So you're basically creating an ecosystem for all the cancer diagnostics.
Well, it's not just cancer. So we have collaborations working on heart disease. We just finished a project with fatty liver, NAFLD it's called. And in both of those workflows, we integrated the AI up front. So getting that AI allows you to get this tremendous workflow. It allows you to do clinical trials quickly, right? If I have 2,000 patients cohort that I want to run in a clinical trial, the current workflows is going to take you a couple of years and cost you a lot of money, millions of dollars. With our workflow, if you have the automated pathology with our workflow, it's 2,000 patient samples we could run in 6 months.
Wow.
That's data. That's 2 data, right? So, and that we just demonstrated that with this project we did in fatty liver, where we processed, actually in this case, 2,700 tissues. We were able to process with developing the upfront AI, and this is the first time we did it. So the upfront AI took several months to develop. It was the first try, and then it took us about 7 months to get them the material for them to do the analysis, right? But it's that tremendous throughput and the ability to do these large trials very quickly and cost effectively. The cost effective part is important.
Do you see any application in infectious and other therapeutic areas as well? Or it's just
we have 2 projects we're working on, one in malaria and one in TB. Just started, and they have the AI up. They've actually developed that AI model already. So we're going to leverage their AI. So they were looking at the problem from a pathology perspective. They had the AI, which is giving us all the pathology data. So we approached them and said, why don't we extend this to doing genomics? So it's called molecular pathology. So we're going to take your AI and go and target those regions where, say, the TB is or the malaria is in liver, and then we're going to go do the genomics in those areas. Right. Those are projects that we have in the pipe as well.
So it's more of a platform approach. So you're very agnostic to disease. You are slowly expanding into other therapeutic areas, diseases. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And we can do that. So we're agnostic to the disease, if you will. And so when we work with a group, they have already figured out the genetics, right? how to study it.
Mhm.
We don't tell them how to do that. What we do is we simply provide them this ability to expand and to do that more effectively the way they currently are. Now we can do the genomics and do all of the DNA sequencing. We do some of that, but right now we work with people that already know how to do. They already have their test. We
Mhm.
just enable the test.
Right.
Right. So we stay in this lane of this platform. So again, initially it was cancer, and then all of a sudden, you know, the fatty liver guys came to
Right.
us, and then again some of the infectious disease people came to us, and the heart disease guys. These guys are actually in Heidelberg. And he said, "Could we work with you?" And we said, "Absolutely. We're entrepreneurs. We gotta keep the lights on." So these
Mhm.
are, but what we've discovered is, yeah, it's truly a platform. I'm still focused on cancer, and the majority of the work we do is in cancer.
Right.
But there are these other opportunities we're finding we actually can do essentially any disease. We're disease agnostic.
Right. So, what is the promised land of QuantumCyte, John Butler? Let's say in 10 years, like how will you measure the success of the company you created? How, like, what is the promised land? Like, do you have any quantitative way to measure the success or impact in 10 years, 15 years? In other words, what is the vision?
So in 10 years, we want our system, if our system is in 20% of the hospitals globally, again, I haven't measured this, then we will be successful. I
Mhm.
mean, from a mission, if we can demonstrate that our technology can accelerate clinical trials, accelerate work in the clinical research, as well as developing clinical tests to benefit patients, then we're successful. I don't have
Right.
my financial goals are really just, to make sure that I can retire
Right.
and so forth. But it's really not a financial goal. It's really an impact goal. And we want to see the technology working in these clinical settings
Right.
to truly benefit them. We don't focus on research and development. It's all focused on clinical. For the
Right.
I mentioned the business model is actually pretty straightforward, and the metrics, the KPIs are defined. If I want to go into a clinical lab, I need to do X, Y, and Z. And once I
Right.
do X, Y, and Z, then they'll adopt it, and then we already know what the demand is, right? So it's fairly straightforward, and the testing is very controlled, right? They've validated this clinical test, and they're going to do it the same way every single time. But that's really kind of it. Again, I haven't put a quantitative metric, but if I were to say, 20% of the hospitals, our sales guys would probably say that's probably ambitious.
Yeah.
But if we can see our technology in every hospital in Denmark, every hospital in the Heidelberg system, every hospital in the Singapore General Hospital system, as well as Duke NUS, which is another hospital system
Mhm.
in Singapore. Seeing it in a lot of hospital systems is really what the success will be. It's really just measuring how are we impacting patients' lives.
If you achieve that goal of installing your devices, your boxes at 20% of the hospital all over the world, what kind of impact we will see? We will see like number of lives saved.
Yeah, what you'll see is you'll see a much quicker turnaround time on testing. Right now,
Mhm.
tests, when you submit material for a given test, can take as much as 12 weeks to get the
Mhm.
results. Now, if I've got metastatic lung cancer, you've just wasted half of my life because I've got 6 months to live and I need information. We want to accelerate that. We want to get that down to a week or something like
Very
that.
cool.
Through automation, we think we can do that. Also, looking at companies like in Latin America. So we're talking to a group in Argentina, and I didn't realize that in Argentina they do very few clinical tests.
Mhm.
They ship them to the U.S., and now their 12-week time has gone to 16 plus. And so taking advantage of being able to bring our workflow, our automated workflow, into Latin American countries to impact patients' lives there would be ideal. And then certainly, if we can get our technology, if we can develop tests that truly focus on finding those drug-resistant cells and finding drug therapies for those patients, that's the ultimate goal. Because the patients that have drug-resistant cells are metastatic, and if we can cure metastatic cancer or slow down the progression of metastasis, that was the original goal I had in 2009, 2010. Right, so help patients like my wife. And by the way, she's doing fine. That would be the ultimate goal: is can we do personalized medicine at scale at scale is the key.
Right.
So
I was
that's,
reading somewhere like people talk about disease as if it's a one disease. Like diabetes is not one disease. It's hundreds, if not thousands of different disease.
yep.
It changes with patients, right? So everyone respond differently. So what you are doing is, so I know personalized medicine is a buzzword these days, but still we don't have a better way to really create personalized treatments and cures at scale.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a buzzword anymore. It was a buzzword 15 years ago. Just
Okay.
in the last 5 years, the medical community are starting to accept the predictability of these drug markers.
Right.
For their orphan drugs is what you're looking at. And so
Yeah.
doctors are now saying, I want to do genomics on my patient. I need options for my patient. My patient has run out of options. I have a very dear friend of mine that passed away about a year ago from renal cancer. He battled it for 10 years. He got to a point where his doctor handed him a list of 7 drugs and said, you pick the next one because I have no idea what to give you. And he contacted me and said, hey, can your test help me out? At the time, we couldn't help him out, right? And so there are the medical community is now starting to use this information, right? It still needs to be adopted and so forth, but personalized medicine is actually no longer a buzzword. It's actually kind of a reality now,
Right.
but still not widely adopted.
Might be adopted,
When I
yeah.
heard about personalized medicine 10, 15 years ago, I said, okay. And it was a buzzword for years and years and years. And it went, okay, everything's personalized medicine, then nothing is. I think people just talk about it as standard practice, but it's just in the last 5 years, Guru, doctors are starting to are accepting the data, right? And so it'll move along at some pace, but it's pretty exciting. And again, if you look at the data, it does make sense, but it's a lot of data, right?
That's right. That's right. So, John, very inspiring story, mission-driven journey. I really appreciate your time. I really enjoyed talking to you, and see you soon. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Talk to you soon. Bye.